We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Aparna Rae. She is the founder and CEO of Moving Beyond. Aparna, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Oh my gosh. Okay, that's a loaded question. Hi, everybody. My name is Aparna Rae, she, her, hers. And after having a career in education and adult learning for a decade, I sort of slipped sideways into DE&I and people strategy the last couple of years. Who I wanted to be when I grew up, when I was, I think, in like single digit age, 5, 6, 7, I wanted to be a flight attendant. And it was at a time, this is in the 80s, the flight attendants, they were all women and they were all beautiful. And we flew pretty regularly. And I just thought that they were like perfect creatures that I wanted to emulate. And then in my teenage years, I wanted to be an anthropologist or an archaeologist. And I spent a summer working in Peru at an actual dig and decided it was like going to be pretty dirty and it wasn't the life that I wanted. So here we are with an office job, and that I think just better suits my personality.
I love that answer. I think that's always interesting to look back and see what we thought we would be as well. And you mentioned your work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I was reading about all the work that you're doing as well. And I know in preparation for our call today, we talked about company climate. And I definitely wanted to ask you about the intentionality behind using climate and not culture, and also understanding what are the ways that you've seen companies really measure their climate, both from a quantitative and qualitative perspective.
Yeah. So culture is really hard to measure because what it means, let's take something like belonging. There's been a lot of, as you know, a lot of conversation, a lot of buzzwords around creating a culture of belonging. So what does that really mean? I mean, if we ask 10 people, they're going to give us 10 different answers. And that makes it really hard to quantify. But if we ask people, are you dismissed regularly in meetings? It helps us quantify something squishy like belonging by saying, here are some indicators of belonging, right? I'm not dismissed in meetings. I can wear my hair, makeup, jewelry in any way that I'm comfortable, for instance. And so when we start to ask those kind of more direct questions, there are things that are measurable and there are things that we can quantify. And especially as, or like, we're looking to have data in larger organizations. We can't sit and talk with all 50,000 employees, for instance. But if we survey people and we discover, for instance, that Asian women who work in tech inside of an organization find that they're regularly dismissed, we have now a path into taking an action, right? Because we have really specific data about a really specific segment of the organization in a really specific department, for instance. And then you said qualitative, quantitative. Now, I think that there are some myths around what kind of data is better. And I definitely hear a lot of people say, well, we don't want to just survey people. We want to ask for their opinions. And I think ultimately it comes down to like scale. Do you have an organization with 500 people or 50,000 people? Because I think the techniques that you're going to use are different. And with 50,000 people, you are going to want to err towards a survey. With 500 people, you could focus group people. The other thing, I would say like qual versus quant, if you're using a good instrument, you can actually get really high quality data that's quantitative, right? With qualitative, I mean, with any kind of data analysis, I think that what's worth saying is that the perspective of the person doing the analysis, or if you're using some kind of machine learning, it's really dependent on their identities, their values. And all data is biased. All of it is. And so if you're going to be bringing in somebody whose identities are very different than yours to analyze that data set, I mean, you lose a lot of validity. What you do get is a kind of richness. And so my suggestion is always start with the quantitative, start really broad based on what you see. Let's say that you're getting lots of conflicting kind of messages from your quantitative data. Now you can bring people into focus groups and get the richness to make sense of it.
Yeah, I think using that data to make an insights-based approach, really try out a strategy, ask for feedback, and understand where you are as an organization. I know a lot of people talk about, wanting that silver bullet or a playbook, but you need to really look internally at your organization as well. And a lot of people with the great resignation, the great reflection, the great reset, all of the things, a lot of folks are looking at are asking the question, how can we be employers of choice? How can we think about creating programs for personalization at scale too? Not every person is the same, bringing different experiences, different identities. With that said, we have to start kind of somewhere and looking and doing that work. What is kind of the number one thing employers can be doing to build a better working model for everyone?
Oof. Okay, well, I don't know that I have like a nice, clean response. One thing that I will say is that some of these things are like marketing terms, like the great resignation, being an employer of choice, right? These are marketing terms. I think ultimately, what helps people feel like they want to come work for you is that you're not going to overload me, right? So you manage your expectations on how long it takes to do my task, and you're not going to try and get me to do a 60-hour task in 30 hours, which means that the other 30 is my time, right? The
Right.
second thing is like trust and autonomy, and I think that those are two things that are really linked closely together. Um, there's no prescriptive model that's going to work for all companies or all departments in a single company, but we know that at the level of like a people manager, they're not likely to be managing 60 people. They're likely to be managing a dozen or 2 dozen at most, right? And so offering people managers a lot of trust and autonomy to lead their teams, that can be game changing. We also know that people's experiences in organizations are highly dependent on that person, right? So I think how companies select, train, support people managers is really critical. But I would say it comes down to trust and autonomy. Trust that when somebody says, "Hey, I have to take my kid to a doctor's appointment," that's where they're going. And I think the more that we can trust our people, the less likely they are to abuse policies.
Yeah, that trust, not overworking folks and really understanding. I love that example that you provided as well in terms of giving people the time and space to do their best work, keep it realistic, and have that two-way conversation. I think your manager can make a huge impact on that as well, and making sure that as the team continue to grow, as I know people want to grow really fast, but having the understanding that people have lives inside and outside of work too, and want to make sure their work is being valued. I also kind of saw in preparation for our interview, kind of some of our overlapping content that is engaged with too. One of Madison Butler's tweets was about really effective anti-racism work, which is great. A lot of companies are doing research about too. And this relates to my kind of next question in terms of what you've seen so far, of course, be kind of a really effective way to dismantle systems that allow harmful behavior. If you could share an example or a story of how you've seen that manifest, I wanted to ask.
Yeah, well, I think Madison would agree with the fact that most organizations, while they've adopted the rhetoric around anti-racism, like they're not setting out to do anti-racism work, right? most organizations at the very best are doing some awareness, some education work. They're not even digging deep into updating their policies and practices that make work for more people. So what are effective ways? I think that where we are today is like habitually waiting for the leadership in an organization to have kind of a transformational experience before a policy or a practice changes. And I'll give you a really this is an example that's going to date me. And it's the story of Sheryl Sandberg when she's at Google. She's pregnant with her first child, and she has to park in the back of a parking lot and sort of like waddle her way into the building. This is a very uncomfortable experience for her. And after that, she has this realization that maybe there should be parking spaces for pregnant women in the front of the building. So they don't have to trudge all the way from the back of a parking lot in their like 40th week of their pregnancy, right? Or when they come back to work, there has to be a way for them to ramp back up, right? That you can't be 100% on the first day back, or that women need like clean, quiet spaces to pump and like store their breast milk, right? So it took a very senior leader to have a set of experiences for the company to adopt new policies and practices. And I see that happen all day, every single day with leaders. We've seen that with Microsoft, with Satya Nadella having a child with special needs to make greater investments in accessibility. And so how we do work better and differently is ask your employees what they need and then take that at face value, right? We need to get in the habit of collecting employee experience and perception data and then using it to make decisions, not saying, oh, Christina, thank you for asking me, like I've asked your opinion, like thank you submitting the survey, great. No, use it. If you have people in your organization, for instance, that are saying, look, like I would love for my company to have a culture where I'm not scheduled into like a late in the evening meeting on Eid or Passover, right? These are not important holidays as per the Christian calendar, but they are important to the people that celebrate them. And I have so many friends it literally will be 7 o'clock in the evening on Eid, and they're taking a call, and you can hear their family gathering in the background. Like that's not cool. So if people in your organization are saying we need to have better hygiene around scheduling on important global holidays, follow that.
Absolutely. You have to actively listen and then take action to show that you're actively listening, and then consistently ask again as well. I think definitely feedback is a gift. And if you are not going to do anything with that feedback, then it's less likely that someone is going to have that conversation with you as well in the long term and stay at an organization too. I like that you brought up kind of policies and just the experience of leaders really having an impact on this kind of systemic change if we're looking at organizations at these microcosms of communities. In what ways can systems or life cycle approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion really help people move forward regardless of where everyone is in their kind of equity journey at the organization, knowing that people are in very different points throughout. Nobody is starting from the same kind of point, if you will.
Yeah. So remember earlier I said how a lot of this works. And by the way, there's a really great report by the Boston Consulting Group. It came out, I think, in 2019. It's called Fixing the Flawed Approach to Diversity. And I think it's in like the first page, and there's summary page where they say the reason that DEI efforts don't work is because they are based on the gut instincts of leaders, and the experiences of these leaders, by the way, are so very different than the majority of their workforce. So how are you applying your experience to somebody who works on the manufacturing floor? Like it just doesn't hold, right? And so what a life cycle approach does is that it takes a more integrated approach to DE&I. We don't need to wait for senior leaders, people managers, even like like employees at large to be on board, like in their hearts, right? Like you're not waiting to activate the passion of somebody to move forward. What you're saying is, as part of our DEI efforts, for instance, let me just take that holiday example and carry it forward. What you're saying is, yeah, we have floating holidays. And so, like, people can use that as they need. But also, what we're going to do is, as the people manager in a department, like, you are going to block off or create no meeting holes on holidays or dates that are important for your employees, right? And that you're going to stick with it, right? And so if the only day somebody is able to do a training or review a budget is 7 o'clock in the evening on Eid, we're going to say no. And we're going to say no because, yeah, like, finding another date that's going to work for 20 people, yeah, that's difficult. But guess what? Like, if we say we value our people and their, like, religious choices, then even if it's only 2 people on our team that are out here with the celebration, we are going to respect it just the same way in which we're not scheduling meetings on Christmas, like, across the board. Like, imagine the ire of your employees if you're like, hey, the best day that works is Christmas or Thanksgiving, or some
Right.
holiday day that's like real precious to people. Yeah, so what a life cycle approach does is it says there are policies and processes that we can be updating and changing as we bring people's sort of hearts along, right? That waiting for people's hearts, like, the change is not incumbent on that. And you move both of these tracks together.
Yeah, I think that is so important in terms of when we say that we value folks and we're listening, it has to align with actions. And it really comes to terms when, okay, that was a really good example of 20 people, 2 people, even one person, it's really important to set up those non-negotiables as well, and to really kind of show that you care for people and you're walking the walk and talking the talk as well. In terms of the last, 2 and even year, are there any trends you've seen in the ways people have reached out to you and working with moving beyond that you want to share with the folks who are listening?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things that I am loving. So, like 2 years ago, but even let's like move it back 5 years, I think so much of the DEI work was either a diversity recruiting program, right? Without a line of sight on retention. It would be around training, lots of unconscious and implicit bias trainings. Right. There were lots of requests for that. I want to set up ERGs and affinity groups, right? And it just kind of paused there. It wasn't, Lifecycle's approach. It was also not data informed, right? So some leader somewhere was like, what we need is a 2-hour bias training. And I think that I spent a lot of my time rolling my eyes at these people who thought that like a 2-hour training would fix anything in their organization. Over the past year in particular, the things that I'm seeing that are really heartening is a lot of talk about retention, right? So lots of people talking about, yeah, I can bring in people of color, or I can bring in people that are neurodivergent into our organization, right? But what am I doing to keep them? So really tracking retention rates, really tracking promotion velocities. Are we promoting men and women at the same rates? Are we promoting white and BIPOC at the same rate? So that's really great. I'm also starting to see the shift in like employee voice being a thing that matters, right? And that makes me so happy because absolutely, like, that's actually the most important thing. How people experience your organization and each other, that literally is the most experiencing. And from that stems all of the work, all of the innovation that you're going to do. And I think that like a focus on mental health, and what has it taken for us to get here is people in positions of power inside of organizations truly suffering over the last 2 years, being responsible for homeschooling their kids, not having access to their nanny and like other house help, to experience a level of frustration that like working class and middle class people have experienced for decades.
Right.
Right? Like, that's actually what it's taken, is like leaders have suffered and are now like, maybe I should allow, right? Maybe I should allow remote work. Like, yeah, maybe I should listen to my people. Maybe I should give mental health days off, right? Um, but I'm happy that we're here. And I think that what's nice is that for a lot of us, we are not going to want to go back to a different way of working. We're
Mhm.
not going to want to go back to doing 30-hour meetings in the office.
Yeah,
Like that can happen over the phone.
absolutely, absolutely. We're definitely seeing a shift towards employee voice and also that accountability piece too, because if you're not offering that at your organization, if you're not prioritizing mental and physical well-being, then there are organizations that are and who are hiring as well and who are doing a good job investing in the careers of their team and also thinking about retention, not only that kind of recruitment and pipeline kind of strategy as well, which is of course important, but that's not a period at the end of the sentence. I also want to ask you too, because we are in March 2022. Can't believe we are here, but we are celebrating Women's History Month and International Women's Day. This year's theme is Break the Bias. Of course, these are things that we should be thinking about 365 days a year. But wanted to ask, what are the ways in which we can really interrupt that bias that we all have, want to acknowledge that and proactively prevent discrimination from really festering at the workplace, whether you are remote or hybrid?
Mm. I would say, there's like, I think there was like a military term that was like see something, say something, and it got a bad rep. But I think how do you break bias? Well, first, I think it's acknowledging that like bias in and of itself is not something that's bad, right? When bias is combined with power, you get things like racism, right? Like bias against people of color plus power to do something about it equals racism. Bias against women combined with power to do something about it is like sexism and misogyny. And so a lot of times biases are shortcuts that we have. And the thing that makes breaking bias really difficult is that they're kind of hard coded into our brains. We're doing things, we're saying things that we're not even thinking about, right? Like very rarely is an act of malice. More most frequently, it's like you've just said or done something, but you don't have the awareness. And I think we see this a lot in meetings where, a white identifying person has like looked at two Asian women in the room and interchanged their names. It happens all the time. And then you look at the other woman and you're like, should I say something? Are we just gonna before you talk like, like am I gonna correct this person who just called me the wrong name?
Right.
So I often say to people, like in the moment when something happens, call it out, not in like a shaming or judgmental way, but like having an organizational climate where it is normal to say, oh, hey there, Dave, like my name is Aparna and my colleague over here, like her name is Anjali. And just a reminder, right? Like what our names are. It's even better if John calls Dave out and says, hey John, like
Yeah.
you said the wrong name. Right. And I think that then is like allyship. So what I would love to see happen more of is people that have positional authority, people that have privilege by way of their identity, to step up and do the work of calling out, not leaving it to people of color or women or people with disabilities in the organization to do that work.
Yeah, I think that is definitely really, really important in terms of what are the norms that you are reinforcing with your actions. Again, aligning your actions and values together, and when it happens, really speaking up and being an advocate too in those rooms too. Aparna,
Yeah.
anything that I didn't ask that you want to share with folks who are listening, or maybe really bolding, italicizing a couple of key takeaways people can bring with them this afternoon?
Oh, bold and italicizing. I would say that if you care about your people, then you are paying them a living wage. I see a lot of companies will issue plaques or send flowers or like a gift card to employees that are the leadership of employee resource groups or DEI councils, or like if it's a small company, like today on International Women's Day, I bet you there are a bunch of bosses that thought it was very cute to send their female employees flowers or a box of chocolate or like a massage appointment. And to all those people, I say, do that and pay your people, right?
People, yes.
Just pay your people. Like, don't send me a box of chocolate, close the wage gap inside of your organization, right? Like, close the promotion gap inside of your organization. I would have that any day over a box of chocolates, which, by the way, if like you're paying me enough, then I'm gonna have the money to go buy them myself.
That's
But
right.
also I think in 2022, and like this is another trend that I feel really great about, is people calling organizations out for not paying living wages, right? Like gas, like petrol is almost $5 a gallon right now. Like that is absolute insanity. Given that if you're living and working in the United States, you probably live in an area that doesn't have good public, like good and affordable public transportation.
Yep.
So you have to drive, right? At a time when like a loaf of bread costs $5. If you're paying your people less than the median income of a region, to me that feels almost criminal. And yeah.
Appreciate people by paying them at your organization. I think that is definitely table stakes, and also it should again be accountable for the company. And yes, I, as a former employee resource group leader, definitely appreciated the compensation over the very nice laminated certificate, or things of that nature. Aparna, thank you so much for chatting with me this afternoon and being on Reimagining Company Culture.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we believe in that employee feedback management as a requirement for the organization to succeed overall. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.